Good Friday morning, and welcome once again to this week's episode of Finding God in the Dark. My name is Pastor Don Stevens. I serve Asbury UMC in Woodstown and St. John's UMC in Harrisonville, New Jersey. John.
Pastor Jonathan Campbell. I serve Lacey United Methodist Church.
I'm Evan Dodge. I'm at St. Paul's United Methodist Church in Brick, New Jersey, which is right next to Wall. So
That's
I'm
right
at a
next
brick
to the wall.
wall.
Now, Evan, I know it's going to be a little bit of a surprise to you, but we figured if the podcast does take off, I mean, we're only episode 13 at this point, but
Right.
if, we build a big audience and we take off, that you're going to have to do something.
Oh, what?
Okay.
Shut
You're good. We have the shirts all ready to go. Three bald pastors.
Three bald pastors.
I am starting to lose a little bit in the front. Does that count?
Yeah.
My hairline
There's a
is
long
receding.
story to this. I won't put it on the podcast for folks, but there's a story to it. Let's talk about the movie. The movie that we watched this week is called Hitman. It is a 2023 film. Now it's 2023, even though it just premiered on Netflix this week. I think it came out at one of the major film festivals last year. I don't know, it was Cannes or Vienna, one of those. So it was technically released in 2023, not to be confused with the 2 or 3 films based on the video game franchise, not that Hitman. It was directed by Richard Linklater and stars Glenn Powell. Wow. This guy's got range. Glenn Powell got range. If for no other reason, watch this movie, just because this guy's got range. Adrian Aranya and Austin Emilio. It is based on a true story, which I think John wants to tell us a little bit more about that. But it's based on a true story about a philosophy
Professor. Yeah.
philosophy professor in New Orleans who part-times as a tech guy for the police in sting operations. So
He actually was a professor in Texas, and the article came out over a decade ago in Texas Monthly by a guy named Skip Hollingsworth. I guess he's a famous writer down there. And if you don't know, Linkletter and Powell are from Texas, and they saw this article and started talking about it and decided to create the movie. And he died a couple years ago. He was a philosophy professor who also, because a lot of professors need extra money, he worked with I believe, the Houston Police Department, and did this work. And the difference between the movie and the article, or real life and the movie, is one of the people he was trying to elicit a contract from. He clearly realized she was in an abusive relationship. He felt sorry for her, and so he talked her out of asking for his services so she wouldn't get arrested. And that's where the truth ends, and then the film jumps off into what if they actually ended up having a relationship and what would happen, kind of thing.
right. Which wow. I think that was my first response to it, was wow. Anyway, Evan, what you we'll throw it to Evan and then see. I want to come back to Jonathan because we started talking a little bit about some of the philosophy and stuff, but Evan, what'd you get out of it?
I was not prepared for. I thought the film was quite a juxtaposition of kind of those, like fluffy romantic comedy action movies with some of that substantive monologue that he's delivering as a lecturer.
Right.
And so I know the three of us were kind of, chatting and texting a little bit about it. And I was being, irreverent as usual. And then Jonathan kind of brought us back, and I'm like, wow, I appreciate that, because you talked about a monologue at the end of the film.
Yeah.
And thankfully I was watching the film when I messaged you, right? So when I got to the end, I really paid attention. I'm like, wow, this is really these are like existential questions, and questions of morality and ethics and how do we behave in this world. And kind of when that's laid next to some of the other content in the film, it made for a really fascinating movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in that sense particularly, and I had kind of the same realization. I hadn't even started watching it when you guys were talking about it in the group text, but the film works at so many different levels in that sense, right? I mean, you can just take it as this sort of dark comedy, romance type of thing, but there really is these very much deeper questions about morality and ethics and that sort of thing. And John, you had an observation before we started filming. I want to throw that back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can take it a lot of different ways. I think Linkletter and Powell, this is their fourth movie together, and they wrote the movie together during COVID. And to me, they really feel like they punctuate the movie with these times you see the Gary Johnson character teaching his class. And he's having dialogues with his class about philosophy. And I feel like they want you to think about the themes that are going on in the movie. So I feel like you could go in a lot of different places with this. You could talk about the film is very blunt that hitmen for hire, they don't exist.
Right.
And police, there are some police departments that literally go out looking for people that might want to do this. And so that are they entrapping them? And are they focusing on problems that could be handled different ways? So that's a question. You could also ask the question about so much of our movies and our culture are completely fine with heroes that kill bad people. And we never have deeper conversations about violence in movies. And so that's a theme in this movie. And then you could also talk about, one of the things, the end conversation he has with his class about basically says something to the effect of, I once thought there were, kind of strict parameters to life. There were things that were right or wrong. And I'm realizing that there's a lot more gray in life and, there aren't absolutes. Well, as I don't know how you guys feel, I'm guessing probably similar. As a Christian, period, it's hard for me to say there aren't any absolutes.
Yeah.
And so this idea of, um, well, life is just kind of you take it as it comes, and morality is just solely determined on what's in front of you, and whatever happens, if it basically works out well for you, that's fine. That kind of morality is very scary. And I think they did a really interesting job of not getting these two people that they kill two people in the movie. And yet the movie ends with them having a happy ending. Like there's no judgment, there's no arrest, there's no, they just kind of go out about on their lives. I think it was a really interesting way to end a movie because it leaves the audience with a lot of questions about, wait, they killed two people and nothing happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost, in a sense, I mean, the words that jumped into my head, and I was telling Jonathan that, this film kind of resonates in my household in that there was so much in the way of philosophy and psychology. My undergraduate degree is in philosophy, and my wife's PhD is in psychology. So, there was all of that in there. But I think the term that jumped right into my head in the end of towards the end of the movie during that final monologue was cultural relativism. Like I do what's right for me.
Yeah.
I do what's right for the culture, but is that universally right? And that's a big question, I think, for any Christian, right? Is what is right for me, is that right for the world? Is that right for the church? Is that right for whatever? I mean, you could how wide you want to expand it, but so that was like my first biggest, I think, observation out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you look like you had something to say.
No, I think to Jonathan's comments, So what is it? What is it now? So I will agree. Like I am a moral absolutist, right? I believe there are absolutes.
Yeah.
At the same time, I do think that there are, and especially as I get older, more of life that kind of falls in that gray area.
Yeah.
Mm.
So how does a Christian hold those two things which appear on the surface to be in tension with one another? How
Well,
does a Christian navigate that? And does
well,
this movie kind of speak to that?
it was interesting because there is a part of the Christian tradition, the Jesuits tradition, is really about you have to take your ethical um, parameters and apply them to the situation. And so, Jesuit philosophy is very comfortable with the idea that you may do different things in different time periods or different situations because you have to judge the situation in front of you. And he gives, I don't know if they were thinking about that kind of conversation, but in the middle of the movie, he has this dialogue with his students, and they're clearly talking about someone who's created or someone who's killed some people, and he talks about what did your decision as a group was, and they go, we decided to do prison without parole for life, and he goes, oh, well, that's really convenient. He goes, now let's take it back 3,000 years, and you don't have a criminal justice structure. What do you do then? And I think there is some truth about the reality that there is some relativism to morality. You have to look at the situation in front of you. I think what concerns me as a Christian or just as a person is you can go too far with that, and you can go to the idea that morality is just what I think and what I believe is right and what works for me. And you can go there with relativism, where you completely disconnect yourself from the well-being of the community and the well-being of of the people around you. And to me, that's where Paul's ethics about the body of Christ come in, where you always have to have a conversation of not just what's best for me, but what's best for the community. And that's kind of where I would, as a Christian, I would respond, yeah, there is some shift in terms of what's the situation in front of you. I don't have a problem with Jesuit thinking about that. But what I would say is part of your thought process always has to be bigger than yourself. What's the damage or the good things that are being done to my community if I do this?
The greater impact.
So
Yeah.
there's a Jonathan. I like all of what you just said. How would this sound? Because this to me is how I would kind of posit what you've said. So as a moral absolutist, I believe there are absolute morals.
Yeah.
However, I do think that it requires us to have sensitivity on how to apply those absolutes to a given situation, right?
Absolutely.
So I don't think like the morality doesn't change. The morality is there, but I think that we could, and that's beyond the scope, I think, of our conversation here. We could talk about and get some agreement on what some of those fundamental moral absolutes are. And then it's okay. So for example, if a fundamental moral absolute might be, don't murder. Okay. So we can talk about situations. So in war, in self-defense, capital punishment, how are we applying those? If a moral absolute is that we should not, lie. Okay. All right. But how does that get played out situationally? So I think it's not like the moral absolute doesn't change, but how that's applied across time and culture and situation, that's the hard work.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm guessing you have similar issues, but to me, something that I thought about when we were just talking is just war theory, right? So there are pacifists who are Christians, and I completely understand that. There have been, unfortunately, in our history, uh, essentially jihadists, and I don't think that's right in the Christian tradition. But there's that stream that the Crusades are jihadists. I mean, they're
Sure.
folks that are just But what developed with Anselm, or not Anselm, with Augustine, was this idea of just war theory, right? And so this idea that sometimes violence is necessary, but he had a really high bar. And as a Christian, especially as a pastor, I recognize how hard it has been to lead my congregation into conversation. Not all wars meet just war theory.
Mhm.
So like not all situations, in fact, very few wars meet that high standard of, you're not going to kill innocents. You're doing something that's proportional. You're stopping once the problem that you addressed has been dealt with, you stop.
Mhm.
And how do you as a pastor, how do we as people of faith encourage other Christians to have those conversations? Guess what? America can have wars that aren't justified, and we shouldn't support wars that aren't justified. We should support only wars that meet that high standard of just war theory. You know,
Yeah.
um,
I'd
but
say,
those
and
that's difficult.
you can take it much more personally,
Yeah,
down to the personal level, right?
absolutely.
I okay. My day didn't start off well today. I get a phone call from the school. My son got suspended
Mm,
the day before he graduates from 8th grade
Mm.
mm, yeah.
because he threw a punch at another kid, you
Mhm.
know? Now, he explained it to me and I understand, and I'm not sure I would have reacted any differently. And he's my kid, he's so there's that balance too, right? How much do you
Mhm.
love your kids, and how much would you tolerate from your kids that you wouldn't tolerate from someone else, you know? So
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
yeah. Um, yeah, I think what's really interesting about this film is he never gives you answers to the questions that he throws
no.
out. But it also, I would be interested to know if they were trying to critique, the silly screwball action comedy where people kill people and we never think about it again. We don't, because to me, he really sets it up at the end of the movie when you essentially have a wedding scene, right? They say "I do" to each other. In the background is a guy slowly breathing his last breath,
Right.
and you have this romantic scene, and in the background during this entire scene is someone dying that they've killed, like, and so you get this kind of, you get the genre turned on its head, right? We all enjoy popcorn movies where the bad guy kills 50 people, but we don't see blood and we don't see the aftermath of this person shooting up the room, but yet those people in the story are dying or dead. And yet this movie really kind of frames it with this beautiful, we want these two people to get together. There's this romantic scene, but right in the background is the what they have done.
Yeah.
And we have to confront both.
Mhm.
And that's something we usually don't do in pop culture. We usually don't have those deeper conversations
Yeah.
of the realities of death and the realities of the actions of the hero.
It's funny because in the course of this discussion, it's just an idea that popped in my head was something that Jonathan, you may remember we discussed when we did the Pace group several years ago, and we went and saw the film Just Mercy,
Yeah,
and we talked about retributive justice.
yeah,
And that's kind of in the same genre as just war theory, right? This
yeah,
idea of how many of our films today, that's the ending is, the bad guy has to die.
yeah,
I don't know, you guys familiar with The Princess Bride,
yeah,
right? And the scene where, they cut back to grandpop reading the story, and is, and little Fred Savage is like, well, what happens to Humperdinck? Does he dies at the end, doesn't he? It's like he almost reflects our culture
yeah,
in that, the bad guy has to die. We
yeah,
can't,
Mhm.
he shouldn't be allowed to live. And yet this film turns that very idea on its head, because realistically, the main characters here are kind of the bad guys. Not really. I mean, they're likable characters for the situation, but
yeah.
by their actions, they're probably not the kind of people you want to be friends with.
Yeah. No, definitely you have what appears to be an abusive situation, and you understand why Madison wants to get out of that abusive situation, and you would
Right.
applaud her getting out of that abusive situation. But killing the person that she's in the abusive situation in with is not necessarily the answer,
Right.
especially because there's no direct. She's not. It's not like she kills him because he's
He's trying to
beating her
kill
up
her.
and he
Yeah.
might kill her.
Yeah.
She literally chooses to poison him to death. Like so, and so yes, this bad guy died who did bad things, but he didn't need to die. And that's always hanging out there is she chose to kill him, and not because they were in a fight or because her life was threatened at that moment, but because she didn't want to deal with him anymore.
Right. It wasn't self-defense, or at least not immediate self-defense.
Yeah.
I've seen enough Law and Order where they try to make that argument that it was self-defense, even though they weren't presently under attack. But
Well, and the one I would argue one deep ethic of Christianity is that we are all made in the image of God, which means even the bad guy is loved by God,
right.
and has worth and has the divine spark within that individual. And so part of Christian ethics, if you take that seriously, is you do everything to make sure that you don't harm that person.
Right.
Um, and but that idea isn't satisfying in usually most of the books and novels and movies we and entertainment we have is nobody wants to see the bad guy live another day. We want to see the bad guy die. And usually in movies when the good guy or the good person shows mercy, they end up getting killed or they end up, how many movies end with the good guy putting down the gun and then they'll walk away and they'll get shot or almost get killed because they decided to show mercy to the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And we could drag this over into the whole discussion, and we brought up the idea of the death penalty, right? Is that again the same idea? Is that retributive justice in the name of the society, right?
Well,
Um,
just like Just Mercy, you have some of those movies that become very popular, but usually Just Mercy, which is about a person that worked as a lawyer on death row, when you have a movie that makes you have to spend time with someone that's going to die, even if that person killed somebody, those movies are hard to set through, and usually most people don't want to set through them.
yeah.
We don't. We want to say boo to the person who killed somebody, and we absolutely should, but we don't want to have to realize that that person sits in jail for 10, 15 years, and maybe the person that we execute isn't the same person. I mean, one of those scenes that I'll never forget from that movie is you get to see in short snippets the radical change of this one person. He comes to Christ. He becomes a teacher to other inmates. He does work to help other inmates get free. And then at the end of the movie, he's about to die, and you realize the state's killing somebody that no longer exists. That's not the same guy that
Right.
was put in prison,
Right.
I don't think we like to struggle with that reality.
Yeah. Yeah. So bottom line, this is a lot deeper film than I think we thought it was going to be going in. I think this
Yeah.
is one we could I think like a lot of films, and this is I think I said a little bit of this last week. But I think just the interaction that the three of us have on these and the different perspectives we bring to it really stirs up some interesting observations and conversation. And again, I appreciate that. We have to move on because we have limited time on these Zoom calls. So we do have to move on to picking a film for next week. Now, again, I started saying last week, Jonathan doesn't know much in the way of anime. And Hayao Miyazaki. I don't know, Evan. Do you think there's one of Miyazaki's films that might be worth a look?
What are you thinking? Like, did you have any in mind?
The one that always comes to my mind that I think has some really great themes in it is Spirited Away. But um, have you ever seen that one, Jonathan?
No, I know of it, but I've never seen it.
Oh, I was thinking Howl's Moving Castle, but Spirited Away too. I think I, Spirited Away would be a good choice because that's like a standard bearer in the
Yeah,
anime.
it is
That's
kind of
that's
the most well
considered,
known of Miyazaki's films. So
yeah,
Hmm.
and one of the greatest animes of all time.
it really is good.
Okay.
So why don't we throw that out there? John, you watch Spirited Away this week. I'll watch it again because I enjoy it and my son likes it, so we'll watch it together.
Cool.
Um, and then
Yeah.
we will talk about that next week.
That's good. I'll watch it with Amelia. That's one of my girls' favorite movies.
Good, good.
So
And,
we'll
like
watch it.
if it was my older son, I would say Iron Giant. That's his favorite. I think at least when he was younger was his favorite movie. Well, you've probably seen that one though, John, right?
No, I haven't.
You haven't seen Iron Giant? Oh, wow. That's it. You want to we've talked a little bit about, Christ figures and Christ
Mhm.
stories in film. Iron Giant is absolutely a Christ figure, a Christ figure.
Okay.
But we'll save that for later. Okay. So next week's film is Spirited Away. It's a Hayao Miyazaki film. It's anime, so it is animated. It's Japanese. We won't require that you watch it in Japanese and read the subtitles. You can watch the dubbed version.
And
Thanks.
it's really I think you'll start to see within the first 20 minutes of the movie some real good overlap with the spiritual world
Yeah,
and Christian
yeah.
concepts.
And I don't think intentionally. I don't think Miyazaki's Christian.
No.
Not intentionally, but we'll save that discussion for next week. Anything else on Hitman, gentlemen? Just a quick mention. There is some, there's obviously we've talked about some,
Yeah.
murder and things. There's some things in there that are not great.
Yeah.
We warn you about that stuff, but
I would definitely say to
hopefully we're all
people,
adults here.
yeah, I would definitely say there's some really good scenes in it. I really love the scene with the phone. I think that's an excellent scene where they're communicating with the notes app. But I would
Oh
definitely
yeah.
say, yeah, don't go into the movie expecting just a screwball comedy because there's more to
It's
it, I think.
definitely not that. But like I said at the beginning, was it Glenn Powell,
Mhm.
the actor who
Yeah.
plays Gary Johnson in it. What
Yeah.
range this guy's all the characters he plays all in one film. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So, all right, gentlemen, I think that will be all for today. For everybody watching, thank you all for watching. Again, there's plenty of ways to follow us. Like the video, subscribe, all of that mess. And we will see you next week. Keep on finding God in the dark. Take care, friends.